Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webinar on getting your site ready for ONEFlux Processing. We will have a few folks presenting with us today, and we'll show a few of the tools that we have available. Here's the agenda. We'll get started with where to find more information about what we're going to talk about today. We'll describe an overview of the pipelines, processing pipelines that we go through, and describe the variable information tool for how to get the basic information about the variables in your data set to AmeriFlux, and then the variable aggregation information. So how do you want us to interpret the information for the variables on your site? And we'll have a few experience reports from site teams and from AMP. And thanks everyone for joining us to present here as well. And we'll wrap up with a brief description of what we do with this information, how we are using this information to process your sites. So we'll have a few rounds of presentation here, a few folks presenting. Feel free to post questions in the chat at any time. We'll keep monitoring that and we'll interact through that, but we will pause the presentations at a few points for folks to ask questions. And feel free to raise your hand and mention something. If there is something that is specific to a portion that we're presenting, feel free to raise your hand and interrupt as well. We can take that and make this fairly informal. So just before we begin, I just wanted to point out a few resources of where you can find information about what we are going to present today. So these information pages are all available in the AmeriFlux website, and you can see here the website, the top portion, the main data menu. If you go to the About Data submenu there, you can find all the information that we're going to present here. We have a very rich set of documentation pages here for you to check out, and all the details are in there. And in the next slide, there is information about the data processing pipelines more specifically. So this is one of the things that we're going to describe here. And all of the links to the associated resources are in this page. So you can go there and check out any of the information that we're going to mention here today. I think that was it for the pointers for information. And now we will hear from Danielle Christensen, who will present the workflows and a few of the data gathering tools that we have for AmeriFlux. So Danielle, you can take it away.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. So a lot of, as Roberto said, there's a lot of information on the website, in particular, this ONEFlux processing page. So I'm going to keep going here and say a little bit more about the overall data processing pipeline. So hopefully many of you are familiar with this. If you're not, please do read more on the website. So when you submit data to us, as a reminder, we do a format check to make sure you're complying with the FPN standard. When your data pass that check, we then go on to the data QA/QC check, where we look through your entire data record and resolve any issues that are necessary working with you. And then once that's done, your data then become available as the base, the AmeriFlux base data product. And but the majority of what we're going to talk about here today is what needs to happen to get your site through this ONEFlux processing step, so that then your site will have a FLUXNet data product available to users. So just to say a little bit more about the two products, recall that the base data product is basically, we just make sure the data that you have provided from your site pass a set of data quality checks. We support all levels of aggregation, and often it takes about 2 months from the time you upload. That's about average, sometimes shorter, sometimes longer. The new AmeriFlux FLUXNET data product is the new product we have put out that's compliant with or compatible with the FLUXNET 2015 data set. We've started our first round of processing last summer and looking to hopefully get many of you through that pipeline as soon as possible. And this focuses on kind of the representative data from the site here. And most of the QA/QC that's done is focused on the requirements for the processing. Okay, so what is actually needed to run ONEFlux? So we need a published AmeriFlux BASE data product. Then we need a set of BADM information. So by the time you have your AmeriFlux BASE published, usually your site general info BADM is pretty good. This is what you provide when you register your site. But the two key parts that we need your help to fill in are this, what we call the measurement height information, and that's supplied via the variable information BADM, we'll talk about the tool that we will ask you to use to provide that information in a little bit. And then the other piece, as Gilberto mentioned, is the variable aggregation, which tells us which data in your AmeriFlux BASE product are representative of the site, or maybe we need to do some aggregation to get the best representation of your site. And then finally, Gilberto puts together this execution configuration file before he kicks off the run. So those are the key components of the site, or to make the run happen. So let's talk a little bit more about the AmeriFlux BASE, because you do have to have some specific variables in that base data product in order for FLUXNET to run. So these variables listed here at the top are required. I'll let you just browse through them yourself. We have a set of recommended variables and then suggested variables here. And again, these are all listed on the website on that ONEFlux processing page. Just to note that VPD is computed from TA, air temperature and relative humidity, and this is different from the FLUXNET 2015 in that we support however many depths of below ground soil moisture and soil temperature that you have now. So you can have all those data included in the FLUXNET product. Okay, so as we all know and love about AmeriFlux, all sites are different. So we definitely need your help to provide the metadata so that we can do these ONEFlux runs. So just showing some of the variable names that might be submitted for this type of tower here. And so we want to go through what the BADM information that we need, as mentioned, the variable information and variable aggregation that you'd need to supply to help us use these data. So first, the variable information. So this is the height and sensor information that describes what's in your base product. So this is the online tool that we use to collect that information. You do need an AmeriFlux account, and you need to be a member of the site team to be able to access your site's tool. So you can update that on the site general info editor, or just contact us if you're having issues getting access. Okay, so the main goal here is to match the variable names that you put in this FPN variable column here with the submitted variable names. So there are a couple ways you can, if you don't remember what you've submitted to us, a couple ways you can find them. Option one is that you can take a look at the format QA/QC email that's been sent to you, and there are links to these online reports. And in that online report, we show you what we read from your file. So these are the submitted variable names that you've given to us. Now, just a quick note here, if you're submitting your data record, in pieces, if you only submit a year at a time, each year, that's great. We love that. But just note that, if you have different variable names in older files, you'll need to give us all of them. So that's just one caveat of this method. For option two, you can always go download your base data product and use that as a source. But the little caveat there is that you need to remove the PI qualifiers in the variable names, because you don't submit variables with that qualifier in it. We add it, so you'll have to take those out. So those are two options for where you find those submitted variable names. Okay, so once you have the variable names, then back to the tool. So just to note that this tool has a couple different flavors based on when your site's data was published. So before we had the FPN standard, those are sites, we we say you have historical data. And what happened is you will, on the tool, you'll see a bunch of grayed out columns here. So this is kind of all the information we had before we went to the recent pipeline that we've had. So we tried to pre-populate the tool for you and make some guesses. And so that gives you a chance to connect your older variable names to the new names, again, in this FPM variable column. So that's a situation, and always reach out for some help if you need advice on this. This map, it can be quite complicated sometimes, but we really want to make this easy for you and focus on just getting the information we need for the ONEFlux, so we can help guide you through that. So the second, for those of you who newer sites who have not had data published in the older system, you kind of have a clean slate. And so you'll have no gray columns, and your variable tool will start off looking like this. And that's what we're going to use to kind of demo the tool now, to walk through the different functionalities of the tool here. Okay, so the demo, let's see if I can get out of this presentation and get to the demo. Okay, so here's the tool. Showing for HA1, but we're going to actually work on MH1. So thanks to Paul Stoy for letting me use his site. Okay, so the first thing I want to point out is this informational section. These are really great, a great resource for you. There's a short video, and then there's a link to online instructions so you can look up things, remember things. Also note that these instructions are dependent on what kind of site, if you had that historical data or not. So please do refresh yourself and have a look at these steps and tips here for reminders. So I like to close that up to give me more working space. So the first thing you need to do if you're coming new to this tool is you need to create an instrument model list for your site. So this is pretty easy. The idea here is just go through the different categories and click the various instruments that you're using at your site. And I'm going to just save this gas analyzer for demonstration purposes here. And then I'm going to show you another trick for those of you who have multiple sites. You can import an instrument list from another site if you've already created it for one of your other sites. So I created a list for MH2 here that I'm going to import. Now, the caveat with this is it wipes out the list that you already have populated. So the idea here is import, and then you can modify. But there we go. I pulled all the instruments that I already selected for the other site, and I can save that list. Okay, now and you can see here that the corresponding instrument choices are selected, and you can just modify this at any time. And so forth. I think it's pretty, this is probably the easiest part. So now on to the variable information where you're actually going to give us the heights and models. Okay, so again, that idea is to create a one-to-one match between the variables you submitted and this FPN column. So the first thing I'm going to maybe think about doing here is adding a variable, and I'm going to just type it in there. I'm going to type in a height. And now, because I created that model list, I just pick the model that I've from that list that I've already created. A note here about the start date column. You only need to fill this in when there's a change of data, or sorry, not a change of data, a change of information here. And I'll show you how to do that in a minute, but you can leave it blank if the height and instrument applies to the start of your data record. Okay, so I'm just going to save this. Okay, so you can do this one by one. If you make a mistake, you can always just go back in, change the name, say I made a mistake in the height as well, no problem. You can just go ahead and edit those rows. You can see the color changes, the light green, the legends up here is that something's not saved, dark green, you saved it. You can also change the color by unchecking that status button. Okay, so now I want to show you how you add a change. So say that there is a height change here. So you just use this add button, and you can enter the new, say it went up to 4 meters, pick the same model because that didn't change. But here's where you have to add a start date. And you You can see you can do year, month, day. The finer the resolution, the better. You can add a little comment, and you just hit enter, and the row is added. Now, a couple more things to show you here quickly is there is, say I typed in a mistake and I went to change the name, but I don't like that. I can reset the row, take it back to its original value. And let's say, actually, I forgot, I'm working at the wrong site. I changed the height at one of my other sites. I need to delete this row, no problem. I can just click that delete button and save, and the row goes away. Okay, so a couple more things I want to show you here, tricks to this tool is, let's say now I want to add my H2O variable. And it's from the same instrument model at the same height. So I can use this reuse value tool and go in and pick this row that's already been entered and just click it once and it auto-fills it for me. So that's another option for you. And you don't have to save these one by one. I'm just doing it to, for demonstration purposes. You can enter many and then save it. So the last thing I want to show you here is I'm going to show you a trick for, say you like to work in Excel, and you want to kind of, this row by row entering is kind of tedious. You want to do it in one fell swoop, or as much of it as one fell swoop as you can. So let me just show you a workflow that might come in handy to you. So I also want to show you, start from here. So I went and got the variable names for this site from that online report. I did a little bit of editing in a text editor, but basically I opened a CSV file with those headers in the same row. I copied them, then transposed the row into a list, and then I just added my heights. You need to do this copy and paste trick, you need to have all these 4 rows, and this is in the documentation online, but you need the variable name, the height, the start date, and comment column. And then I've already entered these first 2 rows. So let's just say I want to get the rest of these. I can highlight them, do a copy, come to the tool, click the new variable, and then just paste right in this first row. And all of that information gets pasted in for me, except the instrument model. So then I got to go back through and add the different models here. But you can see we've tried to make a few features of this tool to make your lives easier. So again, this was the tool, this is what it looks like when you have a clean slate. For you sites that have historical data, stuff looks a little more complicated. Make sure to read or watch this short video and contact us if you have any questions. So that's the demo. I'm gonna, should I pause for quick questions here?
Yeah, I was going to suggest that.
Yeah.
Let's just stop for a minute here and see if we have any questions. We had a question from Marguerite just now, and we answered in the chat, but just to mention, in case you want to add something, she asked if an instrument changed height, will I enter 2 rows with the same instrument with its own start date and height info. I just mentioned the caveat that an entry without a start date is assumed to go all the way back to the start of the record. But essentially, yes, you would add 1 entry per change.
That's right. That's right. Yep. Good, great question. Thanks, Marguerite. Any others? And you can put them in the chat or raise your hand, unmute yourself.
And you can keep posting questions in the chat too. Anything that comes up that we might want to interrupt and ask live, we can do that. And as just a note from Stephen here, the copy paste trick is helpful. I agree that that's a big time saver.
Yeah. Okay.
Great. So feel free to interrupt us at any time. But if no other questions right now, we can probably continue.
Okay,
Thank you.
Sounds good. Yeah. So So once you've entered all the information, you think you have everything ready to go in the variable information tool, we'd like you to email us at AmeriFlux-support@lbl.gov. And in the subject line, just put ONEFlux metadata review request. In the body, just say what sites you want us to review, and we'll have a look, and you will hear back from us if everything looks good or if we have some suggestions for changes, questions, and such. And then once that is finalized, we can then move on to the variable aggregation piece. So again, this is the information that we need to know to be able to understand which of your base variables are representative of the site and or how we should aggregate some of them. So this is how we collect this information. We reach out to you with a draft variable aggregation file that we pre-populate with what, based on that variable information that you gave us. We put this together to suggest what we think should happen at your site. But of course, we need you to review it to make sure it looks pretty good. And I'll go through each of these columns and what they mean in a minute. So all the instructions are supplied in this email that we send to you along with the pre-populated file. And all you need to do, as mentioned, is review it and then upload it via the standard upload data page with the BADM option. So how do you review this file, or what does this variable aggregation file have? So these are the main columns. So first of all, in this first column is the variable that we're going to use in the ONEFlux processing. This second column called members, this is the names that are in your base data product. So these are all the variables that we're going to use from the base data product to make these ONEFlux variable names in this first column. And then this third column, the statistics, is what we should do with these variables in the member column. So you can see that it's pretty straightforward. A one-to-one mapping is what we call a single observation. If you have more than one variable that we need to aggregate, you separate them with a semicolon in this members column, and we take the mean. And those are really the only two options we're supporting right now. There's some special stuff that happens with the storage, which we'll get to in a sec. And then there's a date column, which I'll show you, and a comment column here. So for this date column, we are supporting changes in what needs to happen at your site. So say you only have one air temperature sensor to start at the beginning of your record, and note again, there's no date for the beginning of your record. But then if you want to indicate that at some date, we start taking the average of between two sensors, when you put this second one up, we do need you to fill in that date column. Okay, so then on to the storage component here. So there's a couple different options. So if you collect storage or calculate storage at your site, we want you to indicate to us that we should use that variable in your base data. So that would be, you just enter SC here. In this case that we're showing, this is the case where storage is negligible. So you would put SC_NA in both the members and the statistic column here. And then the third option, which is actually the second bullet here, is we can estimate storage for you using the highest level CO2 variable in your base data. So in that case, you would just enter the CO2 variable, or variables if you have two CO2 at that high spot and we need to take the average or the mean, you can tell us what we need to do there or correct us. We'll of course make a guess for you, and then you can tell us if we have it right. So just going kind of a workflow for thinking about how to handle storage. So storage is important, or if it's negligible, do you calculate it at your site? If so, give us that SC variable name in the members column and choose individual or mean for the statistic. If you don't, and it still is important, then we'll estimate it for you using the CO2 base variable. And again, you choose the individual or mean. Oh, sorry, this needs to be updated. Single observation or mean is the right option there. We'll correct these slides. And then in the case, again, if it's negligible, you enter SC_NA for both the members and statistics column. And if you have any questions about this, of course, just email us back once you get that email from us, and we can help you go through it. Okay. Questions on that section? And I can't see the chat while I'm presenting here, so I guess maybe I can.
We're keeping track of that.
Okay, great, thanks.
I'll mention anything that comes up.
Okay.
Thank you. That's a lot of great information and some really nice tricks and tips that are really useful to know for someone that's getting started with this variable information tool. Does anyone have any clarifications or questions? Feel free to jump in and anything at all that came up during the presentation. And again, at any point, feel free to jump in and post questions to the chat as well. But if no questions, we can maybe move on to the experience reports part. So we have two site team members that agreed to spend some time with us here today, talking about their own experiences using these tools and creating this metadata for us to be able to process their sites. And thank you both again for joining us. And first up, I think Tomer Duman is going to tell us about his experience with Mountain Air Opinion Juniper site. So Tomer, please take it away.
Okay, thanks. So when you asked me to present it a week ago, I said, I have nothing to say. It was too easy. And you told me that's exactly the point. So I'm here to share that. So we did it kind of step by step. You sent me emails when we did it. First, you asked me to go over the variables that I need, and you send me the list. And I said that I already have everything that is required, and also a few of them that were suggested or encouraged. So everything that I had originally are highlighted in yellow. So I already had them. So I basically had to do nothing in this stage. The next thing that I needed to do was to go over the variable. So I went into the tool. And I was intimidated about it because I've never done that. And I kind of wanted to avoid it as long as possible. But when I went into it, it was pretty easy. I first went into the instrumentation and I just added whatever was missing. And that's all I have to say about that. That was pretty easy. And then in the next slide, I went into all the variables, and the guesses that were already in the table were pretty good. All I needed to do is to update a few instruments, add the heights that were missing. And in the comments, sometimes if it was, for example, just net radiometer, I wrote the exact modeling that we have. And there were a few, gap fill data that we submit. So I just wrote what exactly we do in the comments. So that was really easy too. And after that, Danielle sent me the email that explained about the aggregation. And for our side, it was simple because we basically had everything single observation. So I just went over everything and I wrote that it's single observation. And the only thing that one step that I didn't mention here was that the storage, we don't calculate it. So Danielle contacted me and she asked me what's going on with your storage. And I said, we do not have it. And Danielle said, I'll fix it for you. So I don't know exactly what you did. But I don't know if you wrote SC_NA or anything, or you just used the CO2. But it was pretty easy, all of it. So that was it.
Awesome. Thank you for that report. And if anyone, Tom, are going to go ahead with offering questions for you as well. If anyone has questions for Tom or Justine next, feel free to post them here too. And thank you for that report. And it's, I think this is a common experience of coming to the variable information tool for the first time. It might look like a lot of work needs to be done, but that tool was really well implemented. There's a lot of automation in there as well. And we have to remember that these sites have very rich instrumentation and information, right? Even a simple site here, we have 20 variables. So it will look intimidating, but it's really not. Once you get used to a little bit of the workflow, it's really easy to get the information per sites, especially considering that most sites will look a lot like the site that Tomer just presented here. Not a lot of replication, not a lot of multiple instruments. Those are not necessarily part of most of the types of experiments that are conducted with flux towers. So it's not a hard experience at all, even though it might look that way from a first encounter. So thank you, Tomer. That was a great motivator for folks that have still to try this tool, these two tools, right? And next up, we have Justine Misek. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, telling us a little bit about the site, the Old Woman Creek site. Justine, take it away.
Hi. So I guess I agree with Tomer that a lot of the process is pretty straightforward. So I don't know that I have too many things to say about it either, but I'll mention like a couple things that confused me a little bit in case that helps anyone else avoid it. And I think for me, probably the thing that was the most difficult, which is, not to do with the tool itself, but just like tracking down all of the metadata for all of the variables we've measured. Because for one thing, I've been working at Old Woman Creek for just a little over a year. So I think like all of the data that's been submitted is before I even worked here. So I think that's pretty common at a lot of sites where, you have different students, coming in and out, and like different people who actually worked on the measurements, and keeping all of the information together can sometimes be a challenge. So I think probably the thing that took the most time was just tracking down all of the information in the first place. And then in the actual tool itself, I think the thing that took the most time is, like in our case, you can see we had a lot of the sensors that got moved up and down several times. So we have a lot of rows in the table where, a lot of the things were moved maybe 4 times, and then that affects, like if we move one of like the ergas, then it's a lot of variables that are all needing the height change too. So our table has a lot of entries in it. I guess one thing that confused me is that before I submitted the Old Woman Creek data, I had already gone through the process for the US ORB site, which is an old site that's no longer operating. So that was one that has the historical data, and I needed to map it with all of the CDAC names. So I had done that previously. And then when I started working on Old Woman Creek, I was a little bit confused initially because I thought it needed to map to like the submitted variable names in some way, and it was like more directly connected. And then some of the names that were pre-populated, like maybe for CO2, there was one that was like CO2 and then one that was CO2 with the PI flag, which needs to be removed. But then I thought, I don't know which of these is connected to the gap filled one or not, because I thought it was like directly connected to the submitted data somehow. So that confused me for like initially. And then I talked with Sigrid and she explained that it's not actually attached to the underlying data, but in case that, confuses anyone else. And then I think the only other thing I have to mention is that there's a few things that were weird for our site because it's a wetland and it's not, the typical site in AmeriFlux. So there were a few things that were, that are different about this site that's probably like not really what the system was designed for. So for example, we have data for water table depth, which in the case of our site is positive, which is not the usual situation. And since like you need to report the height for all of the sensors, that kind of ran into a little issue because the system is expecting for water table depth that's negative because it's expecting it to be a depth, but in our case it's not. So I ended up kind of like in the height entering like -0 and putting in a comment like what the actual sensor height was. And then also in that case, the instrument that's measuring the water level uses radar too. So it's like a few meters above the water surface. And so like most variables that are measured, like the height is telling you, about the variable at that height. So like all of the, most sensors are this way. Like if you have temperature sensors, like the height is telling you that it was temperature at that height, but there's some of these, weird kind of sensors where the sensor height isn't telling you, information about the variable necessarily. So, and then for our site with the water table depth being positive, which is not usual, it was, not a really clean way to deal with that at the moment. But I think, that was the only like real issue that I had so far. So overall, it was pretty straightforward process. So
Great. Glad to hear that as well. And I will mention that one of the things that Danielle mentioned at the beginning is that the AmeriFlux sites are very diverse, right? And I think this is a big strength of the AmeriFlux networks because we have a lot of sites that are diverse, not only because of the conditions of the site, but because they are pushing the technology. Like Justine just mentioned, that you need a sensor that the actual position of the sensor doesn't really tell you much about what's going on. You actually need to know where the sensor is looking at more. So this is not supported in the system yet. And the site being a wetland is also bringing us some interesting challenges, not only in how we take the metadata, so being able to take this positive depth for the sensor is something that we'll have to consider, and what is the best way to incorporate that into the system. But as you might see in the final product for your site, there are some interesting behaviors in the processing itself. So the data products that you generate, they are not really 100% compatible with wetlands at this point. So we will have to keep improving both our metadata tools and our processing pipelines to be able to take into account all of these, all of this diversity that's going on at the AmeriFlux sites. And although I can see how this can be a bit confusing and frustrating, I see that as a big strength. We can actually evolve the research and evolve the instrumentation and evolve the science in the end by being open to these types of changes and challenges. So I'm usually very glad to hear about these new things that are going on, and they keep pushing us to keep improving all these systems. So thank you for that report, Justine. It's great to hear about your experience with these tools. Okay, I'll do a quick stop here. Are there any questions at this point? Oh, okay. I see one question here from David. We have a flux tower at 42 meters, and that's in Chile, where the storage may be very important, but we just have one erga at the top, so no integrated flux calculated to calculate the proper storage term. How do you guys feel that variable? So I'll take that one first. And there's also a note about how EduPro, so EduPro has a functionality to calculate storage, and it's very similar to actually the approach that we take to calculate storage. So if you have a system, you have a tower that is affected by storage, but you don't have a profile system to measure the storage, what we do is we approximate the storage based on the top measurement of CO2 that you have. So it's basically a model, a very simple one, but it's a model that will estimate how the storage is working for your site. So it's by far not a perfect approximation. There are many limitations, but it helps us get the ballpark estimate in the right getting the estimate in the right ballpark, I guess is the way to describe that. So it is an imperfect system, but it gives us usable results for many of these systems that do not have storage. And storage in some ecosystems is very hard to do right, even if with a profile. So some sites in tropical forests, for instance, evergreen forests in the tropics, it's very hard to calculate proper storage with a single profile, for instance. So there are many challenges related to storage to be able to get it right. But we have these approximations that get us somewhat close to what we should be expecting from storage behavior. David, I hope I answered your question, but let me know if you have any follow-ups and we can discuss more. Any other questions, anything else that comes to mind from these descriptions so far? Right, so if not, let's continue, and we'll have now a perspective from AMP. So Sigrid has been doing a lot of this preparation for a large number of sites, actually. She's got through many sites, getting this information organized and asking point questions about very specific details for the sites so we can get the information that we need to process them. And she has a few points to share with us of common issues that came up and how she's deciding to proceed with all the information. So Sigrid, please take it away.
Thank you. So can someone change the slide for me, please? Okay, so I will present now, I'll introduce 4 sites, from a very simple site to some complex sites that we ran into problems with. So let's start with the more simple side. So I'm showing on the left the base variable list. So the site ID, obviously, it's anonymous in this case, and the variable names. And then in the middle, you probably recognize by now the variable aggregation file. And on the right is a screenshot of the variable information table of this specific site. So in this case, we can see soil temperature as TS has only been measured in one DATS. So this one has been added to the table very simply as TS, as the same way like the site submitted a variable. And in this case as well, from the variable information table on the right, I can see from the flux measurements height, FC, that they measured 3 meters. So I can see that the storage variable is negligible. And in this case, I have pre-populated the aggregation file with, thank you, SC and A. So this is a very simple site. So if we go to the next site that is a bit more complex, but still classified as a simple site and very straightforward to proceed, is this site. Here again, you see the base variables on the left, where you can see several soil temperature measurements, in this case, 3 profile measurements. And on the right, again, the aggregation file. In this case, because the site again had a very well documented variable information table, I could see, as you can see on the right column, I could get information again, the heights, measurement heights. So again, storage is not applicable in this case. And from the, where I have to click away, someone asked a question in the chat. And from the variable information, thank you. From the variable information table, again, I could see that the 3 profiles were all measuring in 3 different locations in the same depth. So in this case, the soil temperatures were aggregated by depths. And in this case, I could add, as you can see in this case, 4 aggregated variables. So if we go now to a site where I ran into some problems, is this site, for example. So this site has submitted the variable 4 soil temperature variables. And as you can see on the right in the base file, there are, and if you look at the qualifiers, it is a profile measurement, so 4 depths. But when looking at the variable information table, I could see this site that has done a pretty good job with filling in the table has entered the same depths for all 4 variables. So in this case, I had to ask myself, did the site make a mistake when submitting the data and is using the wrong qualifiers? And is measuring at the same depths in 4 locations? Or has the person simply made a mistake when filling in the variable information table by adding accidentally the same depths for all 4 variables? So in this case, again, in this case, I had to contact the site PI to see which is the correct entry. And on the right, the aggregation file. In the middle, you can see from the variable information table, you can recognize momentum flux. It's measured as 7.1 meters. So again, and on the right, you see from the variable aggregation file that they have submitted the storage. Exactly, thank you. The storage factor for CO2, and that one I have also pre-populated in the variable aggregation file. So if we're going to another site that is also not an easy site to deal with, or in my case, when I was preparing these files, is this site. Here you can see the soil temperature. Soil temperature has been measured in 5 locations or at 5 depths. I do not know. In this case, I tried to look at the variable information table to see if I have any indication there, and I could see that this site has not filled in any information. So again, for me, it's big question mark. So in this case, I had to get in touch with the PI and say, please clarify what these soil temperature measurements indicate. So in this case, it turned out that some of these soil temperature measurements are actually water temperature measurements, and some of them are actually measured in the sediment below the pond. So I had to make a decision how to proceed when it comes to aggregation file. And in this case, I have simply removed soil temperature measurements from the file. So soil temperature won't go into this aggregation submission. So yeah, so it is where, like, just 4 examples of what I was dealing with in the last weeks. I went through many sites. Some of you got emails from me. I've been nagging. And so yeah, but slowly we're getting there. So yeah, so what is the take-home message here? Excuse me. So yeah, details matters. So in this case, please fill in your variable information table. So you don't get emails from me saying, please, can you? And like in Justine's case, please add comments where you find that the information is not enough by simply adding the variable information and the depths. Add a comment so the user knows where and what you measured, and don't simply assume they know what it is. Like in the last example I've showed. The user does think, yeah, 5 soil temperature measurements, but actually it's water temperature. So yeah, on the other hand as well, keep your site info page updated, because as Daniel mentioned earlier, if you're not part of the team, you cannot access the site, your site variable information tool, and you can also not edit it. So please keep your site page updated. And some of you have received emails about that from me too. And yeah, just one last thing. From working with many sites, I realized that the most mistake people make, or like I've also just spotted on Tomer's page in his variable information table, is the use of the correct radiometer in the instrument model table. So many people, they use actually a 4-component radiometer like the CNR1 or CNR4, and they use use the net radiometer as the instrument model. This one is solely reserved for the simple radiometers that give out only net radiation, like the NR light, for example. So if you use a 4-component radiometer, please use the paranometer combo in this case. So yeah, so Tomer, you have homework to do in this. Yeah, and yeah, just.
So what was I supposed to use from the list for radiometer?
I've seen in the slide you just presented, you had the net radiometer.
Yes. Yeah, what should I have used?
The other option, please, where you have short wave and long wave separately. Exactly.
Got it. Okay, it's the first option.
Yeah, so that seems to be the most common mistake I come across when I look at variable information tables. So thank you.
Thanks.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Sigrid. It's great you have this perspective of what are the common themes across many sites. This is very useful to share with the audience and with the site teams in general. So just before we end, I just wanted to mention very briefly how we use the information that you send us. And this is just a couple of examples. And this goes beyond making the metadata available for folks that really need to understand each of these sites and need the metadata to be able to select which variables they want to use. So if they want to use just a shallow soil temperature, for instance, or if they want to know how much redundancy was available for measuring a site. So that all gets published as the metadata for the site. But beyond that, there are a couple of things that we do use in the processing itself. So I just wanted to give a couple of examples here. So this first one, I'm not seeing the plot. There we go. I think it's just loading. Great. So this is just showing the original records that were sent to us. This site had quite a few measurements of CO2, and they had 2 in particular that were selected to be used as the CO2 that's representative for the site. And one of the things that we can see here is that by using this combination of sensors, we have these redundant variables and we guarantee more availability of data. So the 2 individual time series at the top they both have gaps, but the only big gap that ends up remaining in the aggregated variable is the gap that is across both variables. All of the other smaller gaps disappear because we're able to use these redundant variables. And right now we are using them in a simple way, just taking the average across them, but we are working on more interesting ways of using these variables, making them more compatible by scaling them to each other and approaches like that. In the next slide, we have an example of soil temperature variables. So this one I try to represent the variables as they are installed at the site. So each row of variables that we're seeing here, they are more or less at the same depth, right? So the site team chose to aggregate these variables in a way that we would be able to make the soil temperature representative for the footprint of the site, right? So the top one has 4 sensors, for instance. These are the smaller individual sensors to the right. And aggregating all of them, we have the blue time series on the right. That is not only incorporating everything from all of those measurements, but it is a more representative measurement from across the site. And the same is true for the other depths, even though there are fewer profiles at those depths, there's still a bit more representative information here. And the final 2 slides are just to show what the results look like for some of these sites. And I'm going to name these sites just because there are some interesting points here. And this is the longest record that we have for a site. That's the Harvard site that goes from 1991 to 2020. And the plots on the right are the different temporal resolution plots for net ecosystem exchange. And we have the zoomed in version for the yearly variable. So it's really nice to be able to see this very long records for these sites. And the next one is a site from Tomer, who just presented to us. So there is an interesting trend in GBP here. There is a big decline in GBP towards the more recent years. So there are interesting things happening at the site for sure. So these types of results give us really rich views of these sites. So just to give you an idea of what things look like, this is just a small sample of everything that goes on in the processing and the types of products that are generated based on the information that the site teams get to us. And I think that's all we had for the presentation. Oh, sorry, I just want to mention briefly how to get to these data. And Daniel, you can advance through these quickly. So this is the link there. So there's this really nice designed process to download the data where you select the product, select how many variables you want, the sites, you have to agree to the license, and then you get all of the data available to download, and you just download that data. I really like this interface. It gives you all the information that is needed for you to decide what you want to use. So that was it for the presentation. Thank you again for the site team members, Justine, Tomer. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Sigrid and Danielle, for the really thorough presentation of the tools. And we are happy to take any questions if there is any. And we can stick around for a little while longer if anyone wants to chat. Thank you again.